Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm very grateful for you, Shari, for making time for this. And I hope that you have all had the opportunity to read Shari's fantastic book, Qualified. You want to hold it up?
Yeah. It's also behind me. I'm good on the see, there it is, and there it is. That's my marketing,
Yeah.
double marketing.
Yes. So if you're joining us, please put in the chat where you're joining us from, how you're doing today, and we're going to engage in a conversation about competency checking and what we can do to stop doing it and work toward our collective liberation. And I'm so grateful to you for writing this book and for clarifying for many people, because I had not really thought about or heard the term competency checking
Mhm.
until I heard it from you.
Well, that's because no one has used it before. It is a piece of original scholarship, as they say. And it is something that I identified and gave a name to. Yeah.
So maybe share a little bit about your background and how you came to write this book.
All right. Well, so my background is very varied. I started life as a practicing attorney and did divorce and custody for victims of domestic violence. I did federal policy work for legal services, which is what I used to do as a legal services attorney. Was a funder of the legal services system. Became a news anchor. Did that for a decade. Have been a nonprofit executive and adjunct, and now a consultant. So I run a consultancy company called ITBOM LLC that does strategic equity, systemic equity, coaching, and a whole host of consulting services. And now I'm an author of a book. And the book really came about as a result of my consulting work and my personal experience, which was hearing the voices of people of color and the experiences they are having in the workplace as a coach and as a consultant. I noticed trends. I noticed that people were being told similar things. They were having similar reviews. They were having similar problems, and they were in different industries and they were in different parts of the country. And I was like, okay, this is a thing. This is something that needs to be identified.
And what were they what kind of reviews were they getting? And it's interesting that you bring that up because in my past work, I was in workforce development. So I was
Mm.
preparing young adults of color to enter the corporate workplace. And one of the greatest frustrations I experienced is that the supervisor would not give direct feedback. The manager would not give direct feedback. But all of a sudden, it would come review time, and there would be written some terrible thing
Mhm.
that the young person never had the opportunity to correct. I'm like, if this was of concern, bring it up so that they have the opportunity to do something different.
Right. Well, that's another piece of competency checking, which is the fact that people of color don't get good feedback as they go or reviews. But competency checking really boils down to the ways in which Black, other people of color, and to some extent women have to prove their knowledge, skills, ability, and competency at a higher, harder bar to get the job, to keep the job, to advance in the job, or even to keep the job. And so what I was hearing from people was, especially Black women, was they were being told they're too aggressive, they're scary, they're too dominating, they're too focused on succeeding, like just crazy things. Or they were being given reviews that were solely related to people's perceptions of them and not their work. And even when it came to their work, there was no, as you talked about, no additional information to lead up. Well, I just don't like how you lead. You're not leading correctly. Well, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? Or I don't like how you take feedback. You're too defensive. Okay, well, what specifically are you referring to? So it was this really strange thing. And like I said, these are people who are in arts organizations and governmental entities and private business. And then there was this thing where they're giving all this work, they're doing all this work, but it's as if people have I call it the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. People just forget, like they don't remember. They're like, oh, yeah, you did do that. Well, you don't need to always take credit. It's like, well, wait a minute, I'm not taking credit. I've been doing all this work. And so it was always having to start over and
Mm,
over, and then having to prove every day, every minute, every second, why you were there, what you knew, how you knew it, did you really know it, and then start all over again the next day with
mm.
no kind of retention. And I thought, okay, well, this, and I've experienced that. So I'm like, okay, so this has to have a name. This has to be a modality. Like, what is the modality going on here?
Wow, and that's the name you gave it,
Yeah,
competency
competency
checking.
checking,
Yes.
right. The ways in which you are checked for your competency, which partly comes from computer programming. I think it's like this iterative thing in computer programming where it's checking, 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 but it's what Black folks were describing, and and it was startling, and it was also heartbreaking, that
Yes.
people were very frustrated and tired and exhausted because it's exhausting to have to start every day like the previous day didn't exist, or the previous year didn't exist, or the previous month didn't exist. But if you do anything bad, or if you make any kind of human mistake, well, that everybody remembers. And they always remember that. And that shades everything going forward.
So there's this constant struggle for perfection and
Hmm.
overthinking everything, like, and if I react in any kind of way, what kind
Hmm.
of ramification will that have for me in the short term or long term?
Yeah, I mean, normal human emotions are not things that Black women or men can have in the workplace, meaning being angry, upset, frustrated. Those things are interpreted in the light of violence and fear and intimidation. And I worked in a newsroom, and I saw two incidents. One was a younger white woman got mad and got up and walked out and slammed the door, and yelled at the news director. And another, we had a news director at the time who was a woman who screamed and yelled at a man for, I want to say like 15 minutes, slammed her door so hard the door frame shook. And me and the other Black people in the room were like, they would have called the police on us. Like,
Mm.
there's just no way we could behave like that in public spaces, and whether it's right or wrong, and people do get upset, but there is no leeway. And so that's a very different kind of experience, right? So you're walking a tightrope and trying not to trip any trip wires that are, and it's a hard thing. And so that's why I came up with competency checking, because it was painful for me to hear these stories. And I thought, well, somebody's got to do something about it. Somebody's got to say something. And I was like, my name is somebody, so I'm going to write this book.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Because I know you are helping so many people, including me. I will be the first to admit I have engaged in competency checking.
Yeah.
I remember so clearly, when I worked for the city of New York, I worked for Department of Youth and Community Development. We would produce Youth Week, which is a series of events citywide for young people. And one of the things we did, we had these wonderful young professionals who were graduates of Sponsors for Educational Opportunity come in and give career workshops to like high school age youth. And when the professionals who were graduates of Sponsors for Educational Opportunity came to deliver the workshops, and they were saying, I'm an associate at Latham and Watkins, I'm an associate at Goldman Sachs, like all these things. And I was
Hmm.
looking at them and I was like, How is that possible? Because they looked so they first of all, they looked very, very young,
Hmm.
and they just I had an image in my head
Right.
of what an associate at Latham and Watkins looked, and it
Mhm.
was just so different from my association, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a comment where somebody says they appreciate you owning this, and I agree. I mean, I think that we are not going to move forward unless we acknowledge this is happening. And in the book, I talk about why it happens. There are deep rooted systemic issues in cultural practices that lead us to competency checking. So it was very important for me not to just come up with a term and not explain the why and the how and the when and the what, because a lot of times we talk about terms in isolation. So I really start the first three chapters of the book rooting us in the historical story, but not just as a history lesson, but as a building block, as a foundation for why we have competency checking. So, one of the things I mentioned from a historical perspective is that Jim Crow, which is what happened after the end of Reconstruction, or as historian Mike Green would like me to say, the end of Black Reconstruction, but it's also the end of Reconstruction in the South, was Jim Crow came into being. And Jim Crow is a system of laws of segregation and separation. And most people know uh, white drinking fountains, sitting in the back of the bus. What people don't know is that Jim Crow was also a set of policies and practices. And some of those practices included Black people never being able to display equal or superior intelligence to white people in any form. So that's publicly in any way. Now, this meant you could get harmed or killed. So we have a historical structure that not only reinforced the idea of Black intellectual inferiority, but rigged the game so that you're going to have to come to that conclusion. So if you meet a Black person on the street during Jim Crow, which goes almost 100 years, and they seem like, oh, they're not very bright. They don't have, because they can't. Any
Mm,
type of conversation or interaction with a white person that displayed their knowledge or skill could get them killed. So they
mm.
weren't stupid. And they also were smart. And so we have these things are woven into what we believe, right? We prevented the enslaved from learning to read and write, and then we said they were unintelligent. But just to make sure they were unintelligent, we wouldn't let them get the information to display their intelligence. So there is this deep rooted uncomfortability, hostility, and assumption of lack of intellectual ability of Black people that is really woven into our system. So it's no wonder that people competency check Black people, because every sign and system points toward you doing that. And it sets up white people in a paternal or maternal relationship with grown Black people, where they feel they have the ability to question, confirm, or establish your knowledge or intelligence.
Yes, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how I often talk about in every interracial interaction, it's not just you and me, it's you, your ancestors, me, my ancestors, and everything they're whispering in our ear about how
Hmm.
to show up in this interaction to protect ourselves. So my
Hmm.
ancestors are saying, you better dominate, you better put her in her place because you don't want her to
Blameworthy. Yeah.
retaliate.
Mhm.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah, and
and
this comes from a deep-seated fear, and as I've always told people, this has never been about a fear of Black incompetence. It has always been a fear of Black competence. This fear of Black competence is the root of this, and that given free reign and without being, having two arms, two hands tied behind their back, that Black people would somehow dominate white people in a cruel and unkind way that has been done to them. And the idea that that is some end aim for Black people, I think, is a bit of a white fantasy in a sense, because I'm sure there are some Black people who feel that way. Overall, the historical record says Black people have only ever sought inclusion, just wanting to be included. So, but that fear is behind that. So, yeah, yeah.
And I would add jealousy. I think there is tremendous jealousy among white people of Black excellence, of Black women's intelligence, beauty, et cetera, I think is another big part. And white culture is very oriented to jealousy, very like
Hmm. Hmm.
keeping up with the Joneses and competing with one another for social uh, status and stuff like
Hmm.
that. But we're getting some really, really great comments. I want
Yeah.
to show the double standard is real.
Hmm.
Um, Chris,
Hypervigilance. Yeah.
yes. Hold on. I'm trying to get. Oh, especially as we see how incompetent current top U.S. officials.
Yeah, it's a great insult, but the thing of it is, Black folks have already known about Pete Hegseth's and Donald Trump's. We work with them
Mm,
every day, and we know that these are folks who have been elevated beyond their ability, and they don't see the ways in which the system works to put them there, and we have to endure them telling us we are unqualified, that they know more than us, that they are, and our system even today favors Pete Hegseth. That is the equivalent of a referral based hiring of your cousin's friend's brother because he looks the part or he needs the job. Whereas a Black person applying for that job has to go through the formal process, bring all the skills, beat the AI model to get through, and then get the job interview just to be kicked out because, oh, they don't quite have all the things. Where the Pete Hegseths, their uncle calls and they're able to meet the HR person, get the job, then they're your boss. And you have to tell them what to do. So, there is something insulting about the broad public display of lack of competency and intelligence and telling Black folks that by nature of diversity, equity, inclusion, they didn't earn it. You have an administration full of people who, under no circumstances, would have earned those positions, telling us we didn't earn it. So yeah, that's crazy.
yes. Yeah. Very, very gaslighting situation. I'm reminded of that book, Racism Without Racists,
Hmm.
that is how white affirmative action works, is that we know each other and recommend each other. And and according to social science research, 90% of white people's social circles is
Hmm.
entirely white. So we
Hmm.
are only circulating our social capital among other white people, but
So
that's considered how you get a job, not unfair.
right, but it is de facto race-based segregation, right? I mean, it's like de jure, which is of the law, and de facto, in fact, it is de facto race-based, and which is why in the book I suggest one of my suggestions is that companies consider severely reducing the amount of referral-based hiring that they do,
Mhm.
because it is in fact a de facto closed race-based hiring system. That's exactly what it is. And so and it is a way in that is not as formal or as hard to breach as it is when you come in the front door. And what we know is that Black folks and other people of color generally come in the front door. Now, a lot of people's answer to this is, oh, we'll just get more Black people in and then they can refer people. Data tells us it does not work like that. Black referrals do not carry the same weight. Referrals from Black people, they don't get the same interviews. They don't get the same, kind of carryover into employment. And this, again, has to do with social capital and a whole host of reasons for that. So the answer is not more Black people doing referrals. The answer is less referral based hiring. That actually is the answer. And because I'm realistic, I know we're never going to get to zero. I mean, I would like to see us actually have it at zero, but I think companies hire something like 30 to 40% referral based hiring is a significant backdoor for hiring that is might as well have a whites only sign on it. So that
Yes,
is, you know,
I've seen
Mhm.
data from US Department of Labor, I think, that was
Which
like
probably isn't
7
on their website anymore. It's probably
yes,
gone.
yeah, 70% of jobs you find out about through people you know.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah,
here in Silicon Valley, referral-based hiring is
yeah,
pervasive. There's all kinds of bonuses offered because they
yeah,
can't
it's
find,
outrageous. Well,
they
there's
can't
2
find enough.
Yeah, there's 2 things. There's referral-based hiring in Silicon Valley, and then there's prestige bias, and those 2 things
Mm,
combine to make it almost impossible. So it turns out, I talk about this in the book, that we actually graduate more Hispanic and Black computer science, degree folks than show up in the pipeline or that show up in these kind of elite institutions. So, and actually their numbers have doubled. So I think it's like 3% to 6%, but the numbers are increasing. So why don't they show up at a Google or at a Meta? Because of those 2 things. Referrals, which is a closed, generally race-based system. People say, well, what about South Asians? Okay, that there we can dig into that because I dig into that in the book. There is in fact hiring of South Asians, but there is this other layer around promotion for East Asians in the United States that sees where competency checking hits them. So you really have to disaggregate the Asian grouping to really get a clear view of what's going on there. But generally, it's referral based hiring for people you know, and then prestige bias from prestigious universities. So more computer science degree holders are graduating Black and Hispanic, but University of Houston, right? University of Texas, Louisiana. These are not schools that Meta or whatever is going to pull from because of referral based hiring. All these people went to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and da da da, right? So you have a double barrel, and then you look at the result and you say, oh, we just need to have pipeline for these kids in kindergarten so they can grow up and be coders. No, there are people available right now that you aren't hiring because of the intersection of referrals and prestige bias.
yes. I remember a wonderful, friend of mine who worked at Apple in engineering. She's a Black woman originally from Chicago who had moved here to work for Apple, and she was saying all of the associated living costs of living in the Bay Area, her move, and then being far away from family and all of this stuff makes it extremely difficult. And she
Mhm.
was saying, she just really never. She said, I don't see how we're ever going to really diversify these companies because
Mhm.
it's just too difficult on the individuals.
Well, I mean, one of it would be to get rid of so much referral-based hiring
Yes.
and step aside on prestige hiring, which is the prestige bias, and bring more people in. I mean, that's just the bottom line. But don't just bring them in. Actually, have environments where they're not just there. They're you don't decide, well, oh, they went to University of Houston, they're not as smart as Yale. I mean, that's demonstrably not true. You know, there are a lot of factors we know that get going into elite universities. Not all of them have to do with super high levels of intelligence. The other thing is mentioned in the comment is that once BIPOC shows up, folks start counting, oh, we have 3 Black women, we're counting how many white men and women we have. No, they don't. And in the book, I talk about this research where there is a tendency from white people to overestimate the number of Black people, the number of people of color in spaces in general, but the number of Black people specifically. So they
Mhm.
did this test and they showed slides and they asked, what percentage of these people are Black, and they said something like 40% when it was like 10%.
Mm.
And because our presence is considered unique and different, that it imprints in the mind, because you don't see as many people in your, like you said, 90% of your friend group is white. And as a matter of fact, the friend group ratio of Black people has actually gotten more diverse. I think it's down to 87% is all Black. So like 13% is other races. So the friend groups of Black people are getting more diverse, white people not so much. But in any event, this overestimation of the number of Black people in spaces actually creates a situation where people feel, well, everything is okay. There's a lot of Black people in my office, and there
Mhm.
literally could be three.
Mhm.
But white people tend to multiply them to like 12, and because there's three. And so it can actually create a barrier for advancement because people say, well, look around, there's so many Black people doing things. No, this is actually a very small amount, but their perception is that it's a lot. And so no, I talk about in the book in a college setting, a woman hired several people of color for executive roles, and it was actually a Black woman who complained to the university, said she was favoring Black people. Now, every year prior to that, the slates have been all white men. Nobody ever said that, so it's the presence and the fact that we're not used to, and that we overestimate and that we make assumptions, that causes this problem. And this goes back to what I said, it's never been about a fear of incompetence. It is about a fear of the actual abilities and competence of Black people. So if you have more than three, they're taking over, or the current thing, they're taking our jobs. They took a job from a white man, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump's advisor. So
Yes. When what the point you were making before, all you've ever wanted to do is just be included, just
mhm,
have the ability to use your God-given talents to their fullest capacity and contribute and be a part of the team and recognized. There's this huge fear of like domination and elimination, as you were
mhm,
saying. They call it the great white replacement theory. I'm
mhm,
like,
mhm.
no one is trying to replace us white people. Like, why can't we all just get along? Like, it is not that hard. Uh,
Well, whiteness is a construct, right? I
mm,
mean, the people who are white aren't white. I mean, it's
yeah.
something that we've been told, it's something that we're called, Black and white. Uh, None of us picked this. I didn't pick this title. Black people, we didn't pick to be called Black. We didn't pick any of this. We were forced into this, and told what we were. And then we've been searching ever since to try to identify ourselves in some way that, works. White people are an amalgam and a mishmash of all kinds of ethnicities and backgrounds, put together under a banner for power, period. I mean,
Mm,
that's it. And the reason is a fear of a loss of this power. But as I say, there's another way that white people could look at it, as an expansion, not a retraction. But because we are so fearful that everything we look at is about retraction and not expansion.
yes, yes. That's what my whole life has been about. This is an incredible opportunity. We have never had a country with this many people from all different backgrounds who are
Mhm.
able to like, if we just developed all of our young people to their fullest
Yeah.
capacity, gave everyone a great public education, great healthcare, like we have such a powerhouse of innovation and ideas from all the different kinds of people who are here, as well as connections to economies and cultures all over the world. Like, why isn't this like, why aren't we embracing that? Why does it all just have to
A zero
accumulate?
sum. Well,
Yes.
because it's about protection of white supremacy, not the advancement of humanity, right?
Mm,
And those are two different things, you
mhm.
know. Um,
So
yeah, we have a
so
question from Sarah.
yes. Okay, here we go. For roles requiring experience, I think it'll be a lot more challenging to do away with referral-based hiring. The reason it's a highly used avenue to hire is because it tends to be faster and higher probability of success in the company. What do you suggest to companies hiring that way? What do you suggest to companies hiring that have those types of benefits?
Well, I would challenge that is the best way to get the most experienced people. I think it's the best way to get the people who we know, but it doesn't mean it's the best way to get the most experienced people. What some research done related to the New York Times did a New York Times reported on a nationwide audit survey where they sent out resumes with names that sound black and white, and they found that those names that sounded like their black names got less callback. But one of the things that research found is that when companies had a more organized hiring process, they were less likely to engage in that type of uh, discriminatory outcome of discriminating against someone based on their name. What I have found as a consultant is that referral based hiring is a hallmark of laziness, not that you have not properly done your work about your pipeline. You're not doing a good job about keeping an always on system of hiring, in which case you ought to be able to pull from more arrays of people when you need it. It is a shortcut that is part of the way we think it is because it's the way it always has been. And by the way, it does not benefit white women either at the level it benefits white men. And the reason is because it is a system designed for white men. That is really what referral-based hiring is. It's kind of that insider. It's a vestige of our class-based system. The
Mm,
United States has never been a meritocracy. Like that's a myth. We have always been a class-based system. And prior to actually civil rights legislation, white and black people both benefited from and were harmed by the class-based system we had. And so the way people were hired historically, in white shoe law firms, which were Protestant white law firms, there were no Jews or no Catholics hired at those law firms, was through referrals. You didn't just apply. And so a referral-based hiring is really a vestige of that brought into this century and this time. And that's why I think it needs to be eradicated. There are other ways for an efficient, well-working HR department to be able to have quickly sourcing people than they currently do. And it's just a cop-out to say that they have to do referral-based hiring.
mm. As you were talking, I was thinking about, I used to be a fundraiser in New York City, so I would go to the Yale Club to meet with donors and sit in this room. Okay, it's like a big room lined with the oil paintings of all the presidents who graduated from Yale. And underneath the oil paintings are like these very nice leather sofas and armchairs, and it's just full of white men sitting in
Mhm.
there, like, conducting business with each other. And literally, I would be the only woman in the room. There were no people of color in the room unless they were, like, there as waiters or something,
Mhm.
and you just such a visual manifestation of what that power structure looks like and
Mhm.
how they've maintained their grip on power for
Yeah.
hundreds of years.
Referral-based hiring it's really the way hiring was always done, and it's only shrunk down to like 30 to 40%. So it still maintains its dominance. And it really is that placating or that, acknowledging this old school way of hiring. And the idea that now we do know that people who are hired through referral do tend to be retained longer, but that's only because they're repeating the cultural fit narrative of the people who are there. There's never, so if I'm hiring Jim and I got Jim and I hired 10 Jims, yeah, all the Jims are going to probably work together. But there's no challenging of the Jims because you don't. And when you want to bring in other people, they got to come in the front door. They actually are vetted more. Their qualifications have to be more. Their standards have to be more. They have just said black people have to be 2 times more qualified. So by the time they get in, they actually have more experience. They actually are more experienced because the standard of assessing them is so much higher than it can be when it's referral based. I mean, I tell this story in my book about Charles Scharf, who heads Wells Fargo still. And during the a protest that followed the murder of George Floyd, people asked why Wells Fargo didn't have more Black people specifically in executive roles. And this man stood up and said, oh, it's because, sadly to say, there just aren't any Black people in all of the land who are qualified for these executive roles. Now, I thought that was strange coming from a man whom his first job out of college was with Jamie Dimon. And this is because a family friend got his resume in front of Jamie Dimon. He had an interview and he was hired that day. You
Mm.
see, so he doesn't see, was he qualified for that at that moment right out of college? Likely not. If I, as a Black person, had an MBA and had applied for whatever role Jamie Dimon got, they would have told me I didn't have enough experience. I didn't have enough knowledge. So I do question whether referrals are also always more qualified because they're not, you know. So this was a very concrete example. Here, this man who benefited from a referral based insider system had the nerve to stand up and say there were no qualified Black people in all the land for executive positions at Wells Fargo.
Mm.
That's a strange one.
Thank you so much for responding to that and for your excellent comment there, Ebony. Um,
A link
as
to the book they're asking for.
link to the book. Okay, yes, let me find that. And while I'm looking for that, can we move into solutions based? Like,
Yes. Mhm.
what can people do if they are constantly being told you're not qualified enough? What can we do collectively to change the culture?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, when it comes to competency checking and the intersection of that and imposter syndrome, I ask people to recognize that imposter syndrome is frequently a misidentification of the impact of imposter syndrome or the impact of competency checking on white women, on Black women, on people of color generally. Basically, if you are in spaces that don't reflect you, if you are constantly being asked to prove your knowledge and worth, you're going to feel insecure. That's a normal human feeling. That has nothing to do with being an imposter. So the question you want to figure out is the call coming from inside the house or is the call coming from outside the house? Meaning, is this really an internal issue with me or is this me reacting normally to a hostile environment, right? And then you have to shore up your sense of self. Well, I know I have this knowledge. I know I have this experience. I know I have this skill. So that is, you shore up what you know, but also be able to separate out what is happening in you and what is happening to you, because what is happening to you, you get misidentified as what is happening in you, meaning, oh, I'm not qualified, I'm not good enough. No, what is happening to you being put in that position is giving you these normal human feelings of insecurity. And I do also want to talk about what white people can do to help interrupt competency checking when they see it. When they see Black and other people of color being required to have more education, more experience, meet a higher, harder standard and bar for employment and all these types of things. And I was just telling Karen, a perfect example was what recently happened with the director Ryan Coogler and his movie Sinners. Now, Ryan Coogler did Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, the only Black director to make as much money, highest grossing ever Black director with these two films. And so he does this movie Sinners. It's a mashup movie of vampires in the South. It's really good. I saw it. But it had only been out 3 days in limited release because he shot it in large form IMAX. And the Variety, the industry Bible, basically gave a shady headline and I will say the budget on the movie was 90 million. That doesn't include promotion. So let's say, I don't know, maybe at 20 to 30% for promotion. So 110, 120, yeah, 117, 120,000, $120 million, something like that movie. So Variety was like, oh, it's only made $61 million in 3 days. That's kind of the snarkiness of the headline, like, oh, how is it ever going to make its money back? So that was a perfect example of competency checking, that the movie had been out 3 days. And the assumption was, well, he's not going to make it. This isn't going to be successful. It's a higher, harder bar. But what was interesting about this, I was telling Karen, is that at the beginning, there are others now, but 3 white actors, directors were like, wait a minute, I think this is competency checking. So Ben Stiller tweets, in what world is this headline appropriate for a film that's been open for 3 days and limited release and made $60 million? And I don't know if he's an actor or director, but a guy in entertainment named Joe Russo said, oh, I'm sorry, was he supposed to make all of the movie's budget back in 3 days? That is competency checking. And the fact that they could identify it and name it and undermine it ended up being very powerful, because what it did was it alerted people to, oh, competency checking is going here. And what is this about? And why is he being asked this after 3 days of having a movie out? This is very weird. And then it did the other thing where it caused people to want to see the movie. Now the movie's on track to not only make its budget and its promotion back, but make a significant profit. So that was a perfect example of how that competency checking shows up, but it happens in the workplace. But then you had these men show up and say, well, wait, that's weird. That doesn't sound right. Why does he? And so in the workplace, it's like, why does Yvette have to meet all these standards to get hired? Or why are we concerned about a few spelling errors in this report? I don't ever remember us asking about anybody else's spelling errors. It's that kind of thing where you are interrupting competency checking. So those are just some ideas. There's a lot of things in the book. I talk about interracial sisterhood and how women make up the majority of HR professionals, white women, and yet they don't see themselves as connected to and on the front lines of supporting each other, let alone other women of color. And we have to find a way to get past these old paradigms so that we can work collectively, because one group is not going to be able to do this alone. We're not going to be able to push back against this moment by ourselves. So if you're a white woman working in HR, you might ask yourself, why is Mary, who's African-American and 50 years old and has an MBA, been in this position and never been offered a promotion? I think I would like to speak to somebody about that. That seems strange. It feels like an intersection of race and gender and ageism. So these are the things that we need to do, is we notice it because it kicks back and also helps us, right? A stronger, healthier environment for Black and other people of color has only ever helped white people also in the workplace. That's just a fact. It hasn't undermined, it has helped and expanded support.
In fact, the HR lady would not have her job if it were not for Black people and the civil rights movement. Hello.
Exactly.
Thank you, Black people, for getting me my freedom from sexual harassment, wage gap, and a million other things. Thank you very much. And we swoop in and take up all the benefits. But as you were saying, don't share in the struggle and don't support one another. And that's exactly what we're working on in the interracial sisterhood. And I'm posting the link to subscribe to our newsletter. We also have a thriving online community that we'd love for you to be a part of. And Yvette says non-BIPOC need to speak out more. When BIPOC, especially Black women, raise concerns, it's often dismissed as complaining or whining, no matter how it's said. True allyship means using your voice to amplify ours, not just standing by. Thank you so much for that, Yvette. And I would add to Shari's point earlier, as a white person, what I always try to do is when I'm looking at someone, ask myself, am I reacting to this person based on something that they're actually doing? Or am I reacting to this person based on how they look? And that's the question that I ask myself before reacting to whatever it is that they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great self-check. And I think one of the reasons that non-BIPOC people, especially white women, don't speak up a lot or see themselves connected to Black women is that they've been led down another path where they have imposter syndrome or, like you say, jealousy, or they don't see themselves as part of this collective struggle. So they're over here doing this thing, and we're over here saying, oh, no, no, it's the systems, it's this place, this is the problem. And so, because we're having two different conversations about what's happening to us in the workplace, we have a hard time linking up. And so, my goal with this book is to break some of that down.
Thank you so much. And I think I want people to watch my recent live on fawning as a trauma response. I believe that that is what is driving white women's behavior. I know it's driven my behavior.
Mm,
That there we have different kinds of response to trauma:
mhm,
fear,
mhm,
flight, fright, fight, and then fawning, which is when you suck up to the
mhm.
person who is harming you as a way to protect yourself from further harm. I don't think that white women think of ourselves as having been harmed by the patriarchy, but hello, Brett Kavanaugh's are pervasive, all kinds of domestic abuse, all kinds of different power
Well,
struggles.
and
And
just our history, right? I mean,
yes,
white women were property too,
yes.
but they also were able to own property, which are Black people. But for most of white women's history in the United States, they had to do just what you said. They had to find a way to negotiate with their captors. Basically, they didn't really have, they couldn't didn't have physical strength, they didn't have economic strength, they couldn't own anything, but they could own slaves, but they couldn't own things. For most of, they couldn't vote, so they had to find, this is absolutely a trauma response, they had to find some way to do this and to get what they needed and wanted in this indirect way. And so that's what I talk about that in the book, that Black women and white women have very different roads they've walked to get to this moment together. I always say that white women, society infantilizes them from slavery, patriarchy, into Europe, here. Black women are adultified from slavery. There's no childhood for an enslaved child. You're adultified, and we're still adultified. So when adultification and infantilization meet in the workplace, what could possibly go wrong except everything, right? Everything. We are totally speaking different languages. We've had totally different approaches to how we get here. And so because of those different ways, it's almost like we're talking past each other, not understanding that each other's method of communication is deeply rooted in the same trauma, the trauma of white supremacy and patriarchy on us all, right? But we tend to elevate and dominate white women's ways of communication and degenerate or denigrate Black women's ways of communication. So anyway, I think there's a path forward, but we have to have mutual understanding.
Which is exactly why we need each other, right? I am so grateful beyond measure for my Black women mentors, friends who have helped me grow the F up, like become a grown ass woman,
Yeah.
Stop being a victim, and this is the reality, and this is how, despite the reality, you survive and thrive and experience joy, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
And if we could just all get together and leverage each other's strengths. This is why I created the Interracial Sisterhood Coalition,
Mhm.
because we need a space
Mhm.
outside of the workplace to come together, because when we're in the workplace we're pitted against each other, and of course
Mhm.
that is not an ideal environment for strong relationships to form. We got to form those relationships, heal those relationships outside of the workplace, so that when we come in we already have that united front and that trust
Mhm.
in each other. And I know trust is at an all-time low after
Yeah.
the 92% of Black women voting for Kamala Harris and the majority of white women for the third presidential election in a row voting for Donald Trump. But I'm still unwilling. I'm like, we got to start somewhere,
Mhm.
and I'm just so grateful. so grateful to everyone who
Yes,
joined
thank
us.
you.
Thank you so much. Yes,
Yes, thank
yes,
you. Thank you all. Thank you for the kind comments.
yes. And I put the link to Shari's book in. I'm not sure if it appeared on all the different platforms. It might have only appeared on YouTube. So could you hold the book up one more
Yeah, yeah,
time
yeah.
so
And
we
I
can
can tell
see?
you it's qualified, how competency checking and race collide at work. And it's Shari, Shari. That's you'll find me if you put qualified and Shari. Amazon. It's available everywhere books are sold. Audiobook. It was published by HarperCollins. It's a big five publisher. I need to do a I need to do a podcast on that. What that means. It's a trip publishing a book. But yeah, it's available on all platforms. So
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for your wisdom and for writing this book. And I encourage everyone to read it.
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.